So, this is a little audio reading I did of a story from Archive of Your Own called Ragnatela. It's written by Kieta, the author, and I just want to say that this isn't really like an audiobook or something. It's just kind of me practicing speaking English. It's really terrible, but I thought that it was kind of a waste to keep it on my phone. I don't know if this counts as ASMR, but I'm gonna label it that. If you see this, I'm very sorry. And I guess enjoy your reading of this actually really awesome story. I'm gonna link it in the description. Please read it. This is, by the way, also chapter 53 from currently 58 or something. So there's kind of a lot of major spoilers in here. I'm sorry if this is your first exposure to the story.
Patience woke up next to the stiffening body of her mother. She turned and cuddled those close to her before she fully woke up. Andrea yawned. She tucked the blankets around Flora, then she fed Andrea, trying to persuade him to eat some creamed corn. He spat out most of the food she gave him, still clutching and whining for her breast. When she fed him, he suckled hard on her weak stream of milk and cried in hunger when there wasn't more. It was cold. The bandages on her arms were stiff with blood. She started a fire, but it frizzled out, and she was stuck cradling her son to her fevered, hot body, giving him whatever warmth she had. Its cries echoed dully in her ears. Her mind was slipping again, and they sounded like the bleat of a lamb. A sacrificial lamb. Did the Lord demand sacrifice from his followers? Her mind peered out before she followed the line of thought, but a small part of it stayed there, festering. She looked back at Flora. Her face was gray. Was she cold? She went over to tuck the blankets tighter around her and wipe the blood off her face. The past days were a blur. Sometimes she spent hours at a time forgetting what she was doing and where she was. There was a distinct smell seeping into her brain, something unpleasant. It reminded her of her house in Greenhaven and how her cat would leave small balls under the window to rot. Flora's lips were turning black. A small part of her struggling to keep its place in a recess of her mind from a sludge receipt. That small part of her struggling to keep its place in the recess of her mind away from the sludge of her receding sanity, lured her to walk several blocks to a payphone and use the last few cents she had to call a number. Hello? Yes, I think my mother is ill. It's Pernew Street. When the sirens started to echo down the street, Patience regretted calling them. What if they were on Leonardo's payroll? She carried them, clutching Andrea until the police kicked their way through the rotting door. They swarmed the bed, and one draped a discarded blanket across her thin shoulders.
Ma'am, I think your mother has been dead for some time, I'm afraid.
Patience looked at Flora. Her eyes were swollen and closed as if they zipped her up. What?
This building is scheduled for demolition. I'm afraid you can't stay here, said the policeman.
But this is my home.
Not in 2 months. It'll be gone then. Do you have relatives you can stay with? Do you need to get help or something?
No, she said in a panic, rising at the thought of wrecking balls pummeling through the halls and destroying her safe haven. I can't leave. This is my home. I can't.
Ma'am, I don't want to have to take you into custody.
Patience looked at him blankly, dressed in her rippled coat, her hair and eyes flying wild. I have nothing. My money is all gone. I don't have anywhere to go.
Lady, you need help. Come on, come with me.
They were taking her to see Leonardo.
Her mind erupted in panic at the officer's slack, sinister face. She yanked her arm from his grip, staggering down the fiery escape. She jumped onto the ground, started running, shouts echoing after her. Andrea started crying again, but his wails were swept away by the wind. Day, night, it passed in a blur. She wandered past high-rises, past seedy strip malls, barber shops, theaters, spelling their names in bright neon lights. Her feet were cold and aching, but she barely noticed. People glanced at her sideways, but in the show business district, they gave her a wide breath. As she walked, she wondered, and as she wondered, she cried, and then she cried more. More the despair crept up on her. Where am I going?
I have no one. I have nothing. Benjamin, Michael, Flora, dear Flora, they're all gone. Everyone.
She was staying in her apartment, filling out classified with her meager income, hearing the silence of her apartment in her ears. She was sitting in the room in the attic, with a box of newspapers crippling beside her, head bent listening to her aunt and uncle laugh and entertain guests downstairs. Alone. She was more alone than she had ever been. She was more alone than she had ever been. And there was nothing she feared more than being alone. I should have done it, her voice whispered, in our apartment over the restaurant. I should have taken the gun and put us out of our misery. Me, Flora, Andy. We'd be together then. Together forever. Her toes were going numb. Andreas called in her ear. The iron-ground bridge loomed like a mountain in the wanting evening.
Lines were starting to change from English to Italian, and it disturbed her. She took back alleys through familiar restaurants and shops, housewives gossiping, mustachioed men bellowing her wares, and a shabby-suited man lurking outside of bars. Painted storefronts selling pork sausages and prosciutto. Factories selling cannoli. The savory smell made her mouth water, but she stumbled on, head bent, clutching her whining baby clothes. Night was falling by the time she stumbled onto the cracked sidewalk, lining rows of molding, tin-roofed, demented homes. Something about it seemed familiar. Patience lifted her head to the survey with flickering streetlights, a cracked stone church on this street corner, the way the night seeped into the road from back alleys. Beware dog, broken fences, lawns, worn bare by places overgrown in others. A family was having an argument in one of the houses, with their silhouettes in the window, shoved and screamed at each other, their words occasionally punctuated with the screams of a child. Patience stopped in front of a flat, one-story house, stared with ivory, and took the cracked stone steps to the door. She knocked, her knuckles rasping at the peeling wooden door. Heavy footsteps echoed. A familiar voice yelled, "Hang on a minute," and the door was yanked open. Salvatore Malozzi and Patience Winslow stared down at each other. He looked familiar. Her fractured, lonely mind could only grasp that one aspect. The ruffled, soft, pitch-black hair, the dark brows, the painted face, the sharp jaw, the length of his eyelashes, that rough handsomeness that had attracted her to him. Those eyes, Salvatore's black eyes registered intense shock. So briefly she wondered if she had imagined it. Then they hardened, liquefying into a rage so livid it made her whole body freeze like a rabbit's. Those eyes as black as a wild cat's, streets light glinting dully of the pupils like a lick of hell flame. Yeah. His lips drew back an inch, showing chipped and broken teeth. His whole body was taut, livid, and his eyes were burning into hers. That same look, the same glare Stefano gave me, that Isidoro gave me. This is the face of a man who wants me to die. And some other part of her thought, and if he did, I would deserve it. And then his shoulder slipped. Salvatore turned away. Come inside. It's fucking cold out here. Patience numbly followed. It was warm. The warmth washed over her body like a blessed wave. The radiator was rattling in the corner. Take off your fucking coat. What happened to your arms? Patience stared blankly at the blood-caked bandages as he wrestled her coat off, jerking it down her arms. Jesus fuck. Put down the bread for a moment. Come into the bathroom. Patience sat Andrea on a rippled armchair with beer bottles strewn empty below the floor. She followed Salvatore into this bathroom. It was cramped and small, dingy shower curtain, gloomy tiles, dirty mirror. The seat of the toilet was rusted. Salvatore rummaged through the cabinet below the window and brought out a box with a red cross on it. Sit down. Patience sat on the edge of the bathtub, and the coldness of the plastic was a brief shock to the back of her thighs. He took out her arms and carefully began to unwrap the first one. The slices in her arms had crusted over, but they went deep. The edges turned outward, jaggedly sliced flesh. He let out a loud breath through his nostrils. She could not tell whether it was disbelief or anger. Salvatore took out an antiseptic and fresh bandages. He carefully cleaned out the torn wounds, sterilizing them with the cotton and alcohol. A sob of pain caught her throat, but it was listless. Her mind went dull, as if it were 1,000 miles away. He cleaned the dried blood and pitched the edges of the wound together, and then he, carefully, so carefully, the gentleness was so unlike him, wrapped her arms in clean bandages. Take a shower. Your hair's all over the place and you look like hell. Are you keeping a dead rat in your pocket, or have you been living in the sewers or something? You reek. Jesus, Patience. Salvatore turned away, shoulders taut, jaw clenched. His eyes were hidden, but he could hear the lividness in his voice. What happened to you? Just take a shower. He left the bathroom, shut the door behind him. Patience stared at the shut door silently, then turned to the mirror. For a moment, she recognized why he was so shocked. She barely looked like a woman. Ragged, holes through her skirt, blood-stained cuffs, face dirty, her eyes wild. Her hair was a mass of greasy dirt-cake strands piled on top of her head. She turned the shower on and stepped in. The hot water was a shock after so much time without a bath. Patience stuck her fingers through her hair, unwinding the tanglets. The hot water washed over her body as painfully and laboriously. The pain was a constant ache all over her body and between her legs. As the grime was washed away of her body, she saw all the fading yellow bruises. Her hair was wet and it clung to her collarbone. It had really grown that long? How long had it been since she started working at the midnight hour paler? How long had it been since she started hiding in her apartment? Time passed like a blur. Her memories were a jumble. Patience made her way out, wrapped in a towel. Salvatore was crouching in front of the armchair, playing peekaboo with Andrea. Andrea giggled as Salvatore took his arms away from his face and smiled at him. But there was no happiness or softness in Salvatore's face, just cold indifference. His smile did not reach his eyes. He turned to her.
Go get some clothes from the bedroom. I had a girl over. She forgot some of hers.
Patience walked into the bedroom and saw a discarded pair of underwear and a bullet bra. Ignoring them, she picked up his green skirt and white blouse. The skirt was too tight and squeezed her thighs, but the looseness of the white blouse balanced it out. Salvatore was sitting on the sofa when she came out, staring at her. For once, she couldn't tell what he was thinking. There was a powerful weight between them, something so crushing, so tense it felt like 6 tons were suspended over her head, teetering into the brink until the rope snapped. A stub of a cigarette sent lazy spirals of smoke through the air. Salvatore's pale fingertips lightly drummed the tabletop. She didn't look into his eyes. She wasn't able to. Andrea gurgled. Salvatore turned to him. He began to wail. Salvatore picked him up, to the rest of his blonde head on his shoulder. He began to rock Andrea back and forth, singing slowly in Sicilian. He had a beautiful, deep baritone, so smooth and hypnotic she felt herself falling into his voice, and closer to her eyes, his ears echoing into each corner of her brain. It was a dark house. Slants of lights came through the shades to fall over his broad back, casting his face in one long white stripe. His eyes were so dark, endless as they turned towards her. Andrea was drowsing, resting his head on Salvatore's shoulders. His voice was luring him to sleep. There were tears in Patience's eyes. Why are you doing this? You hate me. You want to kill me. You want to put me out of my misery. Me and Andrea. With Andy sound asleep, Salvatore carefully set him on the sofa and tucked a quilt around him. Patience had to smile through tears. You're so good with babies.
I had a little sister in Silsey. I used to play with her all the time in her cattle. Pick her up, carry her around the farm.
I didn't know you had a sister. Where does she live?
Salvatore was silent for a few moments. She's gone.
The silence fell again, deeper and heavier. Patience slowly curled her hands over her knees. The throbbing of her arms was an ache as dull and constant as a toothache. Salvatore's dark, gruel voice jerked her out of her reverie.
He's skinny, he said accusingly. You ain't been feeding him enough. His diaper hasn't been changed in days. And where the fuck did he get that bruise from? Jesus fuck, you call yourself a mother.